Once upon a time, in a village nestled between rolling hills and a vast forest, where morning mist clung to ancient stone walls and wildflowers dotted the meadows, lived a community of people who had found contentment in the rhythm of simple living. They tended to their crops with careful hands, raised their families with loving hearts, and gathered in the evening to share stories beneath stars that seemed close enough to touch. Among these villagers lived two friends, whose bond had been forged in childhood, but whose minds often wandered down divergent paths. Marcus was the village blacksmith. His strong hands shaped not only metal, but also his conviction that human will was the foundation of all freedom. His workshop, with his glowing forge and symphony of hammer strikes, was a testament to his belief in the power of intention and choice. Each morning, as he stoked the fires and prepared for the day's work, he would watch the flames dance to his command and feel affirmed in his philosophy. "See how the fire bends to my will?" he would often say to those who visited his forge. "This is what it means to be truly free, to shape the world through our choices." Elias, in contrast, spent his days as the village herbalist, working in harmony with nature's rhythms. His garden was not a controlled space, but rather a wild collaboration between human intention and natural growth. He found profound beauty in the way plants would sometimes surprise him, growing in unexpected directions or blooming at unusual times. These daily observations fed his growing suspicion that perhaps true freedom lay not in mastery over life, but in dancing with its inherent chaos. Their philosophical differences became the talk of the village, not for their discord, for they remained the closest of friends, but for the way their discussions would draw others into contemplation of life's deeper meanings. On market days, villagers would often pause near their usual corner by the well, where Marcus and Elias could be found in spirited debate. "Look at this hammer," Marcus would say, holding up his favorite tool. "It does nothing until I choose its purpose. We are like this hammer, Elias. Without the power of will, we are just potential waiting to be realized." Elias would respond by pulling a leaf from a nearby tree. "And look at this leaf, my friend. It grows and falls without any choice in the matter. Yet is it not free in its own way? Does it not dance more beautifully in the wind precisely because it doesn't try to control its path?" One particularly warm autumn evening, as golden light painted the village in amber hues and the harvest moon began its ascent, Marcus and Elias found themselves sharing a loaf of fresh bread and discussing a series of recent events that had shaken their philosophical foundations. Marcus had recently faced a difficult decision when his youngest daughter, Sophia, expressed a desire to study with the traveling scholars rather than learn the family trade. Despite his initial instinct to guide her toward the forge, he had chosen to let her follow her own path. This choice, which he had viewed as an exercise of his will, had left him strangely uncertain about his long-held beliefs. Elias, too, had been grappling with his own contradictions. A sudden illness had forced him to take decisive action to save his herb garden from blight, and the success of his intervention had made him question whether complete surrender to nature's flow was always the wisest course. As they shared these stories, a thought occurred to them simultaneously. Perhaps it was time to seek out the legendary hermit, Critchley, who lived at the forest's edge. Stories of his wisdom had circulated through the village for years, though few had actually sought his counsel. The journey to Critchley's dwelling was not a simple one. The path wound through the ancient forest, where shadows danced between ancient trunks, and the air itself seemed heavy with accumulated wisdom. As they walked, Marcus and Elias encountered small challenges that seemed to test their philosophical stances, a fallen tree blocking their path. Should they force their way through or find another route. A fork in the road, with no clear indication of the right direction. Should they choose decisively or wait for a sign? When they finally reached Critchley's humble abode, they found not the imposing figure they had expected, but a gentle-eyed elder whose small cottage seemed to have grown organically from the forest floor. Herbs hung from the rafters, books lined rough-hewn shelves, and a small fire cast dancing shadows on walls covered in strange symbols and diagrams. Critchley welcomed them with a knowing smile, as if he had been expecting their visit. He gestured for them to sit by the fire, where 3 wooden chairs seemed to have been placed in anticipation of their arrival. The flames cast a warm glow on their faces as they began to share their thoughts. Marcus spoke first, his voice carrying the confidence of long-held conviction, though tinged with new uncertainty. I've always believed that freedom comes from the power of our will, the ability to choose and shape our destiny. But lately, I find myself wondering about the burden of these choices. When I let my daughter choose her own path, it felt like freedom, but not in the way I expected. Critchley nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Ah, the power of will, he mused, reaching for a kettle of herbs steeping by the fire. Let us explore this through the eyes of those who came before us. He poured 3 cups of tea, the aromatic steam rising like thoughts taking form in the air. Consider Descartes, Critchley began, his voice taking on the rhythm of a storyteller. He believed that our ability to think and choose made us free. I think, therefore I am, he famously declared. This idea revolutionized how we understand human consciousness and freedom. Then came Kant, who elevated this concept further, suggesting that true freedom lies in our capacity to create and follow moral laws of our own making. He called this autonomy, self-legislation. Marcus leaned forward, recognizing his own beliefs in these philosophical traditions. But Critchley was not finished. He turned to Elias, who sat quietly absorbing every word. But there were others who saw freedom differently. Heidegger spoke of thrownness, the fact that we find ourselves already in a world we didn't choose, with circumstances we didn't select. He suggested that understanding this condition might be more important than asserting our will against it. Elias nodded vigorously, seeing his own intuitions reflected in this ancient wisdom. This is what I feel when I work in my garden, he said softly. The plants teach me that there is a freedom in accepting what we cannot control. Critchley smiled, reaching for an old book bound in worn leather. Ah, but there's more. Spinoza, whose words are here before me, believed that freedom comes not from willing, but from understanding. The more we comprehend the causes that shape our lives, the more we align with the natural order of things. This is not surrender, but enlightenment. As the evening deepened, Critchley shared more wisdom from the philosophers of old. He spoke of Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, the love of fate, and how it offered a different kind of freedom through radical acceptance. He told them of Eastern philosophers who found freedom in the release of attachment, and of modern thinkers who sought to bridge these seemingly opposing views. The fire crackled and sparked, casting long shadows as Critchley reached his conclusion. You see, my friends, freedom is not a single path, but a garden with many flowers. Sometimes we must exert our will like Marcus shaping metal in his forge. Other times we must let go, like Elias allowing his plants to find their own way toward the sun. True wisdom lies in knowing which approach each moment calls for. As the night grew late, Marcus and Elias prepared to return to the village. But before they left, Critchley offered them each a small gift. To Marcus, a seed, and to Elias, a small hammer. Let these remind you, he said with a twinkle in his eye, that freedom often lies and embracing what seems most foreign to our nature. The journey back to the village was quiet, but it was a silence full of growth and understanding. The moon had risen fully now, casting silver light on the path before them. Both friends felt changed, not because they had abandoned their beliefs, but because they had expanded them to embrace a larger truth. In the days and years that followed, the village noticed a change in both men. Marcus learned to find freedom in letting go, allowing his craft to sometimes lead him rather than always imposing his will. Elias discovered that occasional decisive action could deepen his connection with the natural world he so loved. Together, they became known not just as friends, but as teachers, helping others understand that true freedom might lie not in choosing between will and surrender, but in learning to dance between them. And so the village continued its quiet existence, but it was forever changed by the wisdom Marcus and Elias had brought back from the forest. On quiet evenings, when the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors and the wind whispered through the trees, villagers would gather to hear them speak of freedom's many faces and of the peace that comes from embracing both the power of will and the grace of letting go. Their story spread beyond the village borders, carried by traveling merchants and wandering scholars, reminding all who heard it that the greatest wisdom often lies not in choosing between opposing truths, but in learning to hold them both in the heart at once. For in this balance they had found lay the deepest freedom of all.